Good afternoon, everyone, and apologies, we had a few technical challenges to get us going, so we're a few minutes behind the hour, but we're here today to have a really exciting conversation about human rights and the critical role of internet pharmacies. So my name is Ron Andruff, and I'm thrilled to be the facilitator of this RightsCon online 2020 session entitled Promoting Human Rights and Access to Safe Medicines During Pandemics, the Critical Role of Internet Pharmacies. Welcome to all of you. The internet was intended in large measure to democratize the world in many ways, and over its 20+ years of history, it's evolved to become a mirror of the real world. How can we work together to leverage the internet's amazing capabilities for the benefit of all? This is the ultimate question that we're addressing today. Are standards and norms accomplished at the intergovernmental level through arduous process of harmonization of laws? Or are they best dealt with at an internet governance level through the ICANN policy development process and multi-stakeholder engagement? What lessons can be drawn from other industry sectors, and should this issue be raised to the agenda of international institutions such as the World Health Organization? While internet pharmacies and rogue actors that soon followed have been online for close to 2 decades, the discussion around establishing safe internet pharmacies began in earnest only 3 years ago. The Brussels Principles on the Sale of Medicines over the Internet was developed by a coalition of stakeholders, internet experts, and civil society at RightsCon Brussels in 2017. And then they were adopted at RightsCon Toronto in 2018. So we're very happy to be back here working with all of you to continue this critical conversation at a most extraordinary time. Since the beginning, we've been working with the ICANN community and the United Nations Internet Governance Forum to build out a set of standards and norms on the foundation established by the Brussels Principles. I'll ask Mark to put this, the brusselsprinciples.org site in the chat so you can see it. Today, in this next hour at RightsCon, we're going to look at how we can do better, how we can do more. And the session is really focused on a human rights perspective. The United Nations has said that access to affordable medicines is an essential component to the fundamental right to health. Reinforcing that position in June 2017 with the United Nations Human Rights Council resolution for the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, including access to essential medicines. So we're in search of clarity around governance and jurisdictional issues in a human rights context to identify a framework or criteria that promotes the good actors, using a balanced approach to safety and a global access to medicines using an internet pharmacy. In a few months, at the United Nations IGF, we will tackle the second part of this discussion, namely, how do you address the bad? How do you punish the guilty? And how do we remove the barriers to access? The pharmaceutical industry has played a vital part in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, supplying life-saving drugs that help patients recover from coronavirus. However, the pandemic has also posed severe challenges to drug makers. It's disrupted global supply chains, laid bare the vulnerabilities, and highlighted the need for greater resilience and flexibility. Apart from the disruptions in the supply chain, the world's most prestigious research institutions are racing to accelerate the identification of antivirals and vaccines. And in this disjointed world, with what appears to be lack of leadership at federal level of many governments around the world, simple questions about who will get access, how will it be paid for, ensuring the integrity of these products, all of these things need meaningful discussion. The international debate about access to medicines must be accelerated, and that's what we're doing here today. One of our panelists has highlighted a real danger for all of us, and that's the strong pressure of the pharmaceutical industry that they may very well be incentivized to rush an immature product to market. Dr. Kohler notes that in the past and current actions should be a catalyst for a global call to action, and we'll be hearing more from her today. This session at RightsCon is designed to raise the urgency of ensuring equitable access to medicine and to take the necessary steps to make that happen. We must establish clarity around governance and jurisdictional issues, to meet the core fundamental health, right to health, and subsequent access to safe medicines. Currently in Europe, the European Medicines Agency has installed a system that protects one from fraudulent vendors. All registered online pharmacies have a common logo, and that logo is a white cross with the flag of the EU country. And that gives a consumer a way to check that the internet pharmacy is approved before continuing with the purchase. Why? In a world with almost ubiquitous access to the internet, in a world where consumers price compare every day to make their purchases accordingly, is there no global set of rules that consumers can distinguish between safe internet pharmacies and rogue online actors? The established players in this global space prefer a muddled, confusing set of rules that serve their interests, but we're here today to make a change for the better. Allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. Their bios are noted in the RightsCon system, so I won't spend time on their bona fides, but I can say without a shadow of a doubt that these speakers are leaders in their fields, and thus we validate this discussion just with their presence. So with great anticipation, I would like to introduce them to you and ask each of them to offer one sentence around what they will be speaking to in their segments. Dr. Jillian Kohler, please introduce your segment.
Hi, first of all, thank you, Ron. I'm going to make the statement that equitable access of the global population to COVID-19 treatments and vaccines demands that pharmaceutical companies relinquish profit for the public good.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It looks like Dr. Olafui might have fallen off, so we'll see if we can track her down. In the meantime, I'm going to go to Mr. Bertrand de la Chapelle. Sir. Your microphone is muted.
Sorry, I was muted. We've asked to make a provocative statement. The general idea is, regarding medicines online, there are lessons that we can draw, surprisingly, from the music industry many years ago. Fighting abuses is absolutely necessary, but what matters most is frameworks for legitimate offerings across jurisdiction. It's more difficult than for music, of course, but it probably must be done.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. And last but hardly the least, Arya Ilyadikmad. Sir.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you everyone for being here today. What I will be speaking about during my segment is around the issue that as patients and health systems are increasingly turning to the digital marketplace and it's becoming inevitable, I will argue there is an urgent need for clear and harmonized regulations in order to promote access to safe and affordable medicines.
Thank you very much. And I have Dr. Olafui's statement here while we're trying to bring her back, and I trust Mark and James are taking care of that, our tech team. Oki's statement is there really a justification for price discrepancies for the same medicine in different countries? So these four topics will be the lead in terms of what we're going to be discussing now shortly. However, what I'd like to do right now is to put up a poll. And we're going to ask two very simple questions, but we want to see if in fact we might move the dial in terms of people's views on what we're discussing today. James, can I ask you to bring the first poll up, please? The first poll should be, when it arrives, is check the box that denotes where you live. So we have a sense of who is, how far the reach of this session is going today. So James or Chris, can someone bring that up? We'll look here and we'll see if we can talk to our tech team from here. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have our tech team, so we'll skip these questions, but it's very important to understand. And in fact, I will ask these questions because I really want everyone who's present to have a sense of what we are trying to achieve here. So the question one was really to find out where we all live in this region, and we can probably ask it at the end of the session if our tech guys can bring that up. The second question refers to COVID-19, and it's brought into stark contrast the realities of our global medical system and access to medicines. So the question is, do you understand why there is no globally approved list of safe internet pharmacies to ensure certified, licensed pharmacies deliver safe medicines to those who need them? Yes or no? So give that some thought, and we're going to come back and address that as we move further along in the session. So now I'd like to turn back to Jillian Kohler for her intervention. Jillian has a long history in this space and also working with the World Health Organization and other major institutions. So very excited to have you. Jillian, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And please feel free to cut me off because I very well might go beyond this. I also want to acknowledge that part of my talk today is based on work I'm doing with a colleague, Dr. Lisa Foreman at the University of Toronto. So I want to acknowledge her contributions as well. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the important right to health questions, which are unleashed by COVID-19. And where I'm focusing on is the issue of equitable access of the global population to forthcoming COVID-19 treatments and vaccines, which will likely fall into core state obligations to provide access to essential medicines, as well as whether pharmaceutical companies will be willing to put health of the population above profits. And that is a large issue, which we're seeing today in the news as things are in the pipeline. So I'd like to consider fundamental right to health questions related to affordability, resource allocations, and accountability. Just to repeat, the COVID-19 crisis underscores the importance of ensuring everyone's right to access affordable needed therapies and vaccines, and of bypassing the usual price barriers that new medicines face when entering the market. We've seen this in the past pandemics, such as with HIV/AIDS and treatments for diseases from cancer to diabetes. The public need for essential therapies can really raise significant policy dilemmas for governments regarding public health, equity, and human rights on the one hand, and corporate pricing, intellectual property rights, and trade agreements on the other. And equally important, and where I'm going to focus my attention in a moment, is we need to identify and mitigate against barriers to equitable access and how limited access may contribute to the rise of unwanted results, such as the proliferation of falsified and substandard medicine. So that's part of the problem. So I'm going to focus on 3 points here, and I'll see how far I go along in my limited time. 1, I'm going to talk about corruption. 2, nationalism and attendant trade restrictions and pricing and how these are barriers to medicines. So corruption is defined by Transparency International as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Corruption in the health sector results in lives lost and public monies wasted and creates barriers to healthcare services and products for the most vulnerable and marginalized members of the population. Human rights bodies and scholars recognize corruption as an enormous obstacle to the realization of all human rights, and the right to health in particular, including because of how it undercuts the availability of resources upon which realization of the right to health depends. Recent health crises illuminate how corruption can emerge in the health system and undercut critical responses to emergencies. We saw this with the Ebola virus disease in Sierra Leone and other countries in Western Africa. The EVD crisis demanded quick and nimble responses from the international community that was in many ways learning how to respond to EVD. Sierra Leone, as one example, was the beneficiary of a significant amount of international aid that was provided to UN agencies, NGOs, and other entities to help the government combat the disease. Yet what we found through the audit service of Sierra Leone, which was detailed in a 2014 report, that there was a lack of documentation for the payment of as much as US 3.3 million from the government of Sierra Leone. Is that my 4 minutes?
1 minute to go.
Okay, I need to then just move along. All right. So the other point I'm going to mention is that what we're seeing in terms of a restriction right now for access is vaccine nationalism and trade restrictions as a barrier. So it undercuts the promise of economic, social, and cultural rights like health, that states will engage in international cooperation and assistance to achieve their realization. So I'm not going to go into details because I don't have time, but I do want to make sure I have time to mention the 3rd point. Pre-COVID-19, fair pricing of medicines was a major global policy concern. This hasn't gone away. In the United States, Peter DeFazio, Rosa DeLauro, and Lloyd Dudgett are advancing a path-breaking policy on COVID-19 drug pricing that is rejecting any manufacturer exclusivity for vaccine, drug, or therapeutic product, rejecting any pricing of a COVID-19 therapy or vaccine at an unreasonable price, and demanding transparency of the true costs involved in the product's R&D, manufacturing, and regulatory approval. And in order to make sure I don't take more of my time, what I will mention is that if access to a COVID vaccine becomes constrained by price, national hoarding, or misallocated resources, it is likely that, as with antiretrovirals, human rights strategies such as litigation and mobilization may prove critical for the fight for affordable and accessible medicines and vaccines, as well as other mechanisms. What's important here is that we need to figure out a new approach to profit generation by the pharmaceutical industry in the face of the urgent and enormous needs for treatment and therapies of the global population. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so sad that there's such a tight program.
No worries.
You're hanging on every word. I would like you to continue.
It's okay. I misjudged my ability to go through 4 or 5 minutes, so I had to really cut, but that's okay. You got the main gist of some of the main points. So I'll leave it there. And Lisa and I will have an article forthcoming that everyone can read if they're interested or not.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
All right.
Oki, I see you're back with us. I'm grateful for it. I shared your statement earlier. And so now, madam, you have the floor. If you can hear us, please take yourself off mute. And you're good to go.
Then.
Please go ahead.
Okay, then you shared my question already. So I'll be going straight to the fact that health is a springboard for every other thing we do on earth. And I'm talking about recreation, education, and even commerce, as has been proven by the current pandemic. You know, because of the pandemic, a lot of things had to be closed down. So health is actually very important to every other thing we do. And it is more obvious than ever now that there is a great disparity.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're breaking up really badly. I wonder if you might try to come back in. Maybe we can have James help you come back. We're not hearing you.
The quality of health care.
James, I'm sorry. Could you please bring Oki back in? She can't hear me apparently. Oki, I'm sorry if you can hear me. We're going to have to get you to dial back in because unfortunately you're breaking up. Apologies. Here we go. Online, that's what we get. But we'll see if we can get Oki back. She's coming in from Nigeria. And she's giving us a real world situation. So I do hope she can bring the global South perspective as she returns. In the meantime, Bertrand de la Chapelle, you're at the forefront of the transnational jurisdiction issues. Please share your perspectives with us.
Yeah, thank you, Ron, and I hope you can hear me.
Clear.
In this amount of time, I want just to focus on one relatively simple message. Medicines are naturally heavily regulated products. And that's for very good reasons, because of the risk of harm and because of the challenges of things that are not of a sufficient quality. At the same time, the distribution of medicines is heavily territorial. It is fundamentally based on agreements for distribution, the certification, and the procedures at each national level, which is a direct challenge and a direct conflict with the fact that, by definition, the web is structurally transnational. And it seems obvious to say this, but the jurisdictional challenge that is affecting the medical field is only one of the numerous examples of the tension between the cross-border nature of the internet and national jurisdictions. And of course, in the case of medicines, I don't have to paint a big picture, but it is obvious that even when a pharmacy, an online pharmacy, is perfectly legal in one country, by definition, due to the technical nature of the internet, it is accessible worldwide unless there are measures that are being taken by said pharmacy, online pharmacy, to not be accessible in a particular place. And there are places where such online pharmacies, or this particular online pharmacy, is not legally recognized or accepted. I want to highlight also an important distinction when we talk about access to medicines online or medical product online is, on the one hand, the problems of what the WHO, and it has been mentioned before, calls substandard and falsified medicines. which is a problem in itself. But what we want to focus on here is actually perfectly okay medicines and the conditions of access to these. And this is mainly a problem of licensing. It's mainly a problem of distribution channel. It's a problem of recognition of who has the right to produce and distribute a particular type of medicine for particular types of cure. And there's an additional element, which is in most countries, and legitimately so, there is a requirement to get a prescription, and this prescription has to be validated when somebody makes a purchase online from a medicine. So I don't want to belabor because of the limited time, but it is obvious that it is an extremely complex issue, because in addition to the jurisdictional challenge in general, there is the very important combination of, on the one hand, human rights, and on the other hand, the prevention of harm and the general health in terms of accessing appropriate medicine. So it requires a serious discussion. And as I said in my introductory statement, a lot of attention is dedicated, legitimately so, to fighting abuses, rogue medical pharmacies, etc. This is a topic, as Ron said, that will be addressed mostly in the session that we will have at the IGF. But at this point, the message I just wanted to share is that, like many other topics that touch upon a jurisdictional challenge, there is an absolute need to get the different actors around the table, and that includes governments, international organizations, civil society groups, the pharmaceutical industry, and all the other actors that are relevant, so that they can discuss seriously how to have frameworks. It can be certification, it will be mentioned afterwards. It can be mutual recognition, it can be common guidelines, it can be a lot of things. But we need to probably take the time to focus on what are the ways to enable legal offerings across borders in medical products. And it's a huge challenge. And I personally don't think that it is given sufficient attention at the moment. And we should not focus only on the important, but secondary element of fighting abuses.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Bertrand. That really helps shape the direction here. I see Oki's back, but Oki, I'm going to continue to go to Aria and come back to you if you don't mind, because I think Aria is going to speak a lot with where Bertrand left off, if I may. Aria, merci Bertrand. Aria, please, this is in your wheelhouse. It's all you.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Oki, for letting me butt in. I think where Bertrand left off, I think is quite relevant, because it relates in part where my background is, and I share it because I think is quite relevant here. A lot of my both academic and professional work has been in this space around the governance of counterfeit medicines, and particularly how medicine quality has been governed at the international level. And I have to, of course, thank Jillian, who was in my master's, one of my co-supervisors on the issue, and subsequently spending a number of years with the WHO's member state mechanism working on these issues. And from that particular experience, going forward, this roadmap that I think has been helpful in shaping this work is starting off with a set of norms, a set of principles. What are the international human rights norms that guide this particular space? Understanding where rights and interests can intersect and clash. And then from a governance perspective, which is sort of my background, is where does this norm contestation occur? What institutions have both the mandate, the legitimacy, and the authority to convene those issues and establish standards and guidelines that you're able to harmonize across different jurisdictions. So from a public health perspective around the personal importation of medicines over the internet, there is a risk to both under and over regulating this particular issue. So non-action or under regulation can present, of course, a risk to patients, just as you can't buy any drug at a pharmacy. Not regulating the internet marketplace for medicines can risk public health of patients, and so you can't really rely on free market principles or ignore the issue. But at the same time, over-regulating can stifle access and affordability, and particularly remains a sort of significant public health issue. So with the sort of internet dimension to this, we not only have new sort of stakeholders that participate, but as Bertrand said, new jurisdictional and regulatory challenges. So you have, for example, internet intermediaries that are non and for-profit, such as ISPs and DNSs. But you also then have rules that are drafted in particular jurisdictions that have implications for actors around the world. So terms and service agreements, for example, can determine who obtains a particular top-level domain and what digital marketplaces are then able to operate in what jurisdictions. And so Jillian touched on, for example, the EU's common logo as an example of one jurisdiction that is attempted to tackle the issue. But just this past week, for those who may have caught it, the US administration signed 4 executive orders on drug pricing, and one of them specifically is around, in a sense, expanding the importation of medicines from Canada, but also other jurisdictions as well, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, Section 804. So what, in a sense, the goal going forward is thinking about and exploring how you are able to create these bright line sort of regulations so that the actors in this space understand the risks and how the laws impact not just the intermediaries, but also the patients and principally, of course, the patients from a public health perspective. So VeriSign, for example, I wish Pat was here representing with VeriSign, which is sort of a domain name registry service that operates the .com top-level domain that operates 90% of all e-commerce online. They've had issues with discretionary nature of the guidelines of the US FDA, for example, where it creates this gray space and this lack of clarity around importation. So even though there are explicit mechanisms, it's acted on in a very discretionary way. So I will sum up by sort of talking about some of the pieces and where we've come from sort of the Brussels principles that Ron opened this discussion with. So that particular document, and it's really brusselsprinciples.org, which was an initiative of the Prescription Justice Institute that was developed by a multi-stakeholder group at a couple RightsCon fora in Brussels and Toronto, establishes that set of norms that align with international human rights standards. The next step at the Internet Governance Forum last year was understanding the intersections of these rights and exploring and unpacking those regulatory and jurisdictional challenges. So I developed a discussion paper on that, digital governance of public health towards a regulatory framework for internet pharmacies. But I would also urge you to check out the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network's sort of seminal report that they developed around more broadly regulatory and jurisdictional challenges in the digital marketplace. Moving forward, the questions that we and I, as a researcher, am exploring is gathering the appropriate international actors and pursuing a set of harmonized standards and norms. So that it can include, for example, not just the internet governance community like IGF and ICANN, so the technical and governance folks, but I would argue it's incredibly important to also incorporate the public health and the global health actors like the World Health Organization and other actors like the member state mechanism I mentioned. And the risk, I'll finish, is that similar to a lot of my work on counterfeit medicines, if you don't frame the appropriately, and if you don't have the appropriate stakeholders, there is a risk in undermining the access to safe and effective medicines and ultimately undermining global public health. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I hate to cut this off. We have questions that are going to come in shortly. So I want to get to questions from the audience. And so I'm going to turn to Oki, and hopefully Oki, you can hear us and we can hear you. You need to unmute your mic, and please, the floor is yours. Unmute your mic, Oki.
Yeah, I'm doing that now, Ron. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. All right.
Yes. I just want to speak to the issue of the disparity in healthcare services across the globe. The coronavirus pandemic has made it more obvious there has been a lot of groundbreaking innovations and innovations and breakthroughs in healthcare. But for us in Africa and in developing world, we can only access such innovations, most of them in our dreams. And so my call is for a more integrated effort in issues concerning healthcare by the global players like the WHO and others, that stakeholders like the government, the non-governmental agencies. I especially want to talk about Africa and Nigeria, where I come from. I know in Nigeria currently of 200 million population, we only have 3 laboratories that are certified by the WHO for testing of medicines. That is really bad. And in Africa of about 1.3 billion people, only 465 million have access to the internet. And here we are talking about accessibility of medicines through the online pharmacies or every other way you can think about it. So I want to speak to the African situation where, like in Africa currently, we have online pharmacies. We don't even know the number because there's no regulation. Nigeria has about 15. They are also unregulated. And talking about even the brick and mortar ones, we
Oh, I hate to lose you in the middle of your session here.
we don't have regulation for them as we speak. So we use for 19, like the remdesivir, Nigeria, unless you're willing to pay about $3,000. If you want to get it, you need to look into the online pharmacies. But even that is not made easy because of government policies. We have a lot of corruption in the system with the leadership, the corruption and the selfishness in governance, also the desire to perpetually look forward to foreign aids is not helping issues on the part of our African leadership. So I would want to say that there should be a change in the way things are done concerning healthcare. We want a more integrated framework for healthcare. And I'm asking that foreign bodies and the local ones should act and press on the government, engage them much more to do better when it comes to policies on healthcare. The online pharmacies are here to stay. I would want to recommend that all the stakeholders should come out with better frameworks for regulating them. They are not going to go away. They are only going to increase in number. We need accreditation. We need a list for the good ones and the bad ones so that people can know exactly where to look. So I would want to say that the payment platforms and all should see health as a human right and work towards accessibility for the patient. We have a right to source medicines from wherever we choose and look out for, even across borders, for our healthcare. So I'm hoping that everyone that is involved in healthcare issues would look into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oki. I'm so glad you're able to reconnect. That's so important. And bringing this view from the global south, you know, I made the comment early in the opening statements about how ubiquitous the internet is, and you make it very clear it's not as ubiquitous in the global south as it is here in the north. So thank you for that. Thank you all of you panelists. I'd like to now turn to some questions from the audience. But before I do, at this point, I would like to turn to Tim Smith, because I believe he's in the audience. He's the executive director of the Canadian International Pharmacy Association. Tim, I wanted to ask if you're a real world example of an association trying to negotiate these current complexity. So if you can put your question into the chat, that would be very helpful so that we might get that responded to. But I'd like to understand how, whether this is influencing your situation in terms of member takedowns, issues, and so forth, as a real world example of an Internet Pharmacy Association. So thank you for that. In the meantime, I'm going to take some questions from the audience. And so I see Robert Guerra has submitted one, and I would like to turn and give this to Jillian if I can. Jillian, the current pandemic has accelerated the use and deployment of the internet-based technologies and services. How will this change the role of internet pharmacists can play in this situation. So looking at it from your point of view, and then I would like to turn to Bertrand to answer the same question.
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question. I mean, I think what Oki was saying was so critically important, that people should know where they're getting their drugs from, and not only from safe pharmacies, but also knowing which are the pharmacies online that you shouldn't be buying from. I can't really say whether COVID-19 is going to accelerate the use of internet pharmacy. The question is, again, goes back to what I was trying to mention as well. There's the risk of falsified medicines when we have supply disruptions, which we've been seeing, when we have incentives for the production of falsified medicines, when there's high demand, when there's fear, which is obviously ubiquitous right now in terms of people wanting to get access to potential medicines as well as medicines that they need for other treatments. It can encourage, unfortunately, spurious producers. So I think the key is really to hone in on making sure that if people are going to be moving towards the internet more forcefully now, how are we doing it in a safe way? So it's a thorny question. I don't have a specific answer to that question. I just want to highlight that I thought Oki's point was really important. Not everyone also has access to the internet, so we can't sit there and assume, okay, this is going to solve the access issue. But I do think that if people are going to turn to the pharmacy through the internet, we need to make sure that it's done in the right way.
Perfect. Stop. Thank you there. Thank you very much. Bertrand, could you take a minute or two and give your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that Robert asked this question, because it was one of the comments that I intended to make in the end. One of the fundamental challenge when we are thinking about multi-stakeholder efforts, putting people around the same table to try to find a solution to a jurisdictional problem, is that usually they come with a problem that they have with each other. Everybody believes that it's the other one who's not doing what they should be doing. And the big difficulty is at first to find a way for them to consider that they have a problem in common. And the problem in common here, you can formulate it in many ways, is, as Oki said, online pharmacies are not going to go away. And the question is, in a certain way here, regulation is something that is enabling. And everybody is understanding that some rules are needed to move forward. But to answer Robert's question is, I'm wondering what impact the COVID-19 will have on the willingness, for instance, of certain actors to move in a direction that is more structured. Because if you take the position, and I don't want to defend or accuse or whatever, if you are at the position of pharmaceutical companies, there is one pressure, which is to say, this is an exceptional period and we are willing to make an effort because there is a huge health case. And at the same time, there's a legitimate concern that whatever decisions they may make in this environment will be set as a precedent for all types of medicines. And having a debate that is taking into account the difference between a specific environment like the pandemic and the general problem of access, which is a second dimension, is probably necessary. That's what comes to mind as I hear the question. In the context of the COVID, because otherwise the rigidities in the discussions will be increased because of the pandemic, and people will fear precedent setting, which is unfortunate but probably unavoidable.
Thanks, Bertrand. Jillian mentioned a note that wanted to add it at the comment. I'm not sure if I got that before or after you.
No, just briefly, I just wanted to comment on Bertrand's, and I think Aria was mentioning the same point. I think the importance of a multi-stakeholder forum is critical here. And I just wanted to say that there has been past experience. If you look at the Medicine Transparency Alliance, it was essentially putting together people who had never really had deep dialogue before. And they managed to make headway just by simply getting together and understanding what are some of the issues they're facing. So I just wanted to say that I think those arguments are critical. They might seem a little bit kind of in terms of coming out short in terms of not really proposing anything revolutionary. But I think we can really make great strides if we build trust amongst the various groups And the only way to do that is to get people, maybe not these days in the same room, but get them virtually together to have that dialogue.
The question will be, who's the convener?
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So I'm seeing a question here, and I'm going to throw this probably to Aria, but anyone's welcome to comment. The question is, litigation has been mentioned as one of the tools that can assist. Is there any case law to refer to that as either that has either revealed the problems or tried to patch them up? Is there any case law on litigation in these cases? And I'm not sure about the litigation itself, so I'm not sure who mentioned litigation in your comments, but is litigation an issue that would be a tool to assist in solving these problems of being access to medicine via safe internet pharmacies?
Sure. I am admittedly not a lawyer, and having Jillian's collaborator, Lisa Foreman here, who's one of the sort of world's foremost experts on international human rights laws that applies to access to medicines, I think would be would have been really convenient. But what I can say is that where in jurisdictions you have particular case law that has emerged, and I can speak to issues of access to medicines, and particularly on issues of medicine quality, you oftentimes have particular jurisdictions and particular actors in jurisdictions, like, for example, enforcement agents, having to interpret the domestic or international rules in a very particular way. So around medicine quality, for example, there was a number of significant issues about 10 years ago where the European Union, and particular member states of the European Union, took a very particular interpretation of the issue of counterfeit medicines that gave them significant leeway to seize legitimate generic drugs that were not under intellectual property protection where they were developed or where they were going, that caused, I think, a need for clarity. And around this issue as well, the case law specifically is around trying to create those bright lines around a lot of this discretionary nature of the regulations. And because this particular issue is somewhat discretionary, particularly given the fact that you have some major internet intermediaries that are based in the US with terms and services that are based on US precedent law, you need greater clarity. And a lot of the case law in the last few years has really been about clarifying those edges and getting rid of the gray.
Thank you, Aria. Appreciate that. I'm seeing also in the chat, we have a note here saying that Gabe, the founder of Prescription Justice, and the Institute, the co-founder of Pharmacy Checker, was one of the ones who really started the push for the Brussels principles, and a lot of credit goes to him for them existing to this day. But he notes that feel free to endorse the Brussels principles if you go to the website. So he made that note. I wanted to ask the question about DNS versus jurisdiction. You know, how do we solve this problem? Where does this problem get solved? So, you know, I hate to keep turning back to you as you, Bertrand, but we don't have Pat Kane. Unfortunately, Patrick was planning to join us, and he had a family situation. He had to not be allowed to participate with us on this session. So I'm going to throw that one back at you real quickly, just a couple of ideas on DNS or going the jurisdictional route.
Yeah, a couple of ideas quickly. One, Internet and Jurisdiction as a policy network, as one program on action at the DNS level to address abuses. A general remark is that the jurisdictional challenges around access to medicines make action at the DNS, unless there is a blatant infringement, and particularly on the case of falsified medicines, etc., very difficult to use the action at the DNS as a tool, because it's a very blunt tool. In the example I was giving, you cannot block a domain name if the online pharmacy is legitimate in India and it actually is accessible in Japan, but if you block the domain name, it is not accessible in India anymore either. The key point that I want to highlight, and it's opening a big debate, it was barely briefly alluded to by Arya, is there is within the program of new GTLDs a TLD that is an extension called .pharmacy. And there is a challenge, indeed, in the fact that it is managed mostly under US law, and that therefore, if it were to be used as an accreditation mechanism for the good pharmacies online, it would necessarily be exclusively under US law and not international law. And that is a problem. That's all I can say at this stage. But yes, the DNS is an important layer, but it is probably not the solution for addressing most of the abuses. And we will, but most of them is not the right tool. And this is going to be addressed more thoroughly in the IGF session, I guess. And I'm sorry that Pat is not there.
Thanks, Bertrand. So it's 3:52. We've just got time for another question or two. I see Urvi Negrani has put a note in the chat saying this dialogue is focused on policy. Are there any direct health providers in the chat who can share an experience that's being left out? And I think this might come to you, Oki. And particularly, we've spoken before about the way medicine is actually dispersed or distributed in Nigeria. Often it's a couple of pills in your hand from someone who has a bottle. Can you talk a little more about that? So you take your microphone off pause, Oki. Oki, or there you go.
Yeah, I can hear you now, Ron. A bit faintly though.
We hear you now.
You wanted me to speak to. I didn't get what you said.
We were asking, one of the questions in the chat was, is there some real world experiences that we can share about medicines? And I was asking you if you could speak to the issue about, we had talked about Nigeria and how often it's not about a prescription, it's about someone with a bottle who has some pills, he'll sell you 3. There was getting to that real world experience about what we're talking about, why the importance of having a safe pharmacy, internet pharmacy.
Okay, Ron. So in Nigeria, the level of regulation is really very bad. We, like I said earlier, we only have 3 laboratories that are WHO certified for testing of the quality of medicines. Outside of that, we have a whole lot of issues concerning governance on health issues. Health is not a priority of our government in Nigeria, if you ask me. And I say this because currently we have in Africa generally 30% penetration of fake and counterfeit medicines as compared with 1% in the developed world. And so along with other issues like you have people that are not pharmacists running pharmacies and even going into community practice aspect of pharmacy. This has endangered the patients. A whole lot of other issues, like people would rather stop at the pharmacy than go to the hospital for their healthcare needs because of the queues you get in the hospitals. All of this is talking about poor leadership. And I'm hoping for a discussion like this and more in the international meetings and the importance of healthcare. I hope we can come together and really put pressure to realize that health is a human right and people really have to have the best, even in Nigeria. You have cases where people sell medicines on buses, at car parks and all of that. There's just no regulation. There's no rule, there's no, you can hardly get justice even when you're injured concerning health issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oki. So listen, this has been the fastest 60 minutes of my life. You all have so much to say, and I've had to cut you off every few minutes, and I apologize for that because everything you've had to share with us is so valuable. We had done a poll at the beginning, and I understand that in fact we have some results of that poll, and that others may have seen it. I didn't see it on my screen, but when it came to the question that we asked at the beginning, and we're going to do this poll again right now. The question was, COVID-19 has brought into stark contrast the realities of our global medical system and access to medicines. Do you understand better why there is no global list of safe internet pharmacies to ensure certified licensed pharmacies deliver safe medicines to those who need them. And in that first poll, 70% of the people said no, and 30% said yes. I'm asking that same question again. I wonder if we can ask our friend James to get that second poll up. I don't see it, but I understand others do see it. So if you could just answer that question. Now we've had 55 minutes of robust discussion. Do you understand better now why there's no global list available? And then once we ask that question, I wanted to ask a second question. And that question is, do you think creating a list of approved safe internet pharmacies should be resolved at the internet governance level or at a governmental transnational jurisdiction level? So should we be dealing with this at an internet level or a governance level, or should we be dealing with it at a governmental level? And we'll see the results of that poll. Hopefully in the next few minutes, someone will share that with me and I'll be able to share with you. In the meantime, I'd like to just say a few closing remarks, and that is, I'd like to thank all of you for your excellent interventions, and apologies for cutting you so short. To add to the thought-provoking information, and Aria mentioned it, that there was an executive order that was just signed expanding Americans' ability to import medicines. This is the first time an American president has utilized his authority to create an explicitly legal personal importation program that was actually passed into law in 2003. And how this will play out, only time will tell. But here in the United States, where I'm based, the pandemic has cost tens of millions of jobs. And in fact, that's indeed to people all over the world are losing their jobs because of this COVID-19 pandemic. And many of them don't have insurance anymore. So access to affordable medicines becomes ever more important. And getting a set of standards and norms in place is really the goal. We're going to be developing a dynamic coalition now leading up to IGF with stakeholders from across the spectrum. And we would really like to have you join us in this conversation. So if you'd like to continue to participate with us, please send an email. I'm going to ask Mark Dadeskel, who's working with us, to put his email address into the chat. So by all means, take that down and make a note of it and bring your voices and your ideas. We want to once and for all create an approved or a whitelist of safe internet pharmacies on a global scale while ridding the internet of rogue actors in this space. So thanks again to all of the panelists. Couldn't have done this without you. I'm very grateful for you bringing your voices. Also want to say, please stay safe to everyone. Wear your masks. Be well. So thank you very much for your participation. And for all of you who joined us today, I hope you'll continue in this discussion with us. Thank you very much. Before the poll goes, the answer to the question. So do we know more? Question 2, do we understand what it is? No, it's still 70% don't understand, and 30% still understand. So we have a ways to go on the governance issue. Governance is 65% of the people believe we should go the governance route, and 35% feel we should go the government route. And with that, I will say my goodbyes once again. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.